I'm Mark Babalian, Stewardship Chair. Several people could have been up here to speak, but they chose me, unfortunately. And I do want to be light because I want to talk about how blessed this church is. And we are. And there are so many volunteers in this church that work day in, day out without their names being recognized. And they do so much for our church, our community, our church family. I just thought a couple weeks ago of an example was I hadn't been to the church campus in like 6 or 9 months towards the end of last year. And I had to go meet Faye, our financial person. And I was coming out of the office, and one of our members, and I'm not going to name this person's name because they could have been anybody that's a member of this church. She was loading up her car with gifts for Brother's Keeper or Wyoming Park or something, and I helped her a little bit, but I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, we're loading all of my car up with all this stuff that the church has collected on behalf of this program." And I said, "Okay." But then she said, "This is my third load. It's incredible what we're doing at this church." And she was just so excited, and it was like inspiring to me that this person is giving their time to do this, to transport these loads of things to the people in need in the community. There are so many volunteers in this church. There's also leadership in this church of various committees. Throughout the pandemic have been very involved. Like, David mentioned Mike Keepers, the church council chair, Phil Bledsoe, the finance chair, Suzanne Green with trustees, and then Gene Imes, who just recently, a couple months ago, took over the staff parish committee. And what really amazed me last year on finance, we routinely had meetings, and there would be like 13 to 14 members present on Zoom, and great ideas what we need to be doing to move forward despite the pandemic. And it was just, the neatest part was, we had a lot of young members, and you would hear kids wanting to go to bed or get a bedtime story in the background, and then there's a lot of technical people with headphones on. I could barely turn on my computer, but it was just great to see so many people involved through this process. And I think this church is truly blessed, and there are so many things that this church has shown, the 5 pillars of the United Methodist Church, that we show, our faith through our prayers, our presence, our gifts, our service, and our witness. In fact, during the pandemic, as you may recall, March was a tough month, and many people gave above and beyond, and then some people accelerated their gifts to help us through March. And then we got hit again, as you know, in August with the pandemic, and people just, without even being asked, rose up to the occasion. And we are just, in that regard, we're so blessed. So with that being said, and then with David working with church council and Ann and all these people about this vision for the church for the future, because we do need to figure out what's our core DNA, because we're doing so many things for so many organizations. And we have to figure out what are we going to focus on, because we're just getting spread all over the place, because so many people hear about this church and they want us involved in their organizations. So at a finance committee a week ago, we've been talking about this for several months, but we need to be transparent of where we are financially right now. And we also need to be transparent where we see ourselves like in a year or 6 months or things like that. And we got through 2020 and we got through the first quarter of this year, and everything is fine, but we see on the horizon is there's headwinds for this church, okay? So what I mean by that is, what I'm stewardship chair for is the operating fund, which is about a $1.1 million budget every year that just really takes care of the operations of the church. We have other programs, but those are specific or they're designated funds. But this $1.1 million turns the lights on, runs the campus, runs the facilities, pays our staff, does the mission work, okay? And that's what we do, Rebecca and I do the campaign for every year. And this year, just to be honest with you, was a little rough because we weren't together in November and October. So we had to do everything via, videos and letters and a few phone calls, but it wasn't the normal campaign. And then the So the operating budget is funded through pledge giving, which is the majority of it, right? That's people that say at the beginning of the year, I want to give X. And then we have non-pledge giving, which is generally people want to give, but they don't want to pledge, which is great. And that ranges like $250,000 to $300,000 a year, all right? So we budget for that. And then obviously we have loose plate, that could be $20,000 a year, and that's just people throwing money in or doing stuff, dropping off a check at the church or something like that. So what I want to do, and I want to get to the point, is I just want to give you 6 numbers, and there's going to be a test after this to see if you remember them. But just remember this, in 2019, before the pandemic, I'm just going to talk about pledge giving, because non-pledge giving remains relatively constant, hopefully, but it stays relatively constant. Pledge giving, the people that pledge at the beginning of the year and they give it throughout the year. So in 2019, before the pandemic, there was 177 pledge givers. Okay, so remember that number. 2020, that number dropped to 150 because for various reasons during the course of the year, people could no longer give, or they moved on, or they stopped, but they still came to the church. Then in 2021, our pledges for the year, remember I said 177, 150? The pledges we received for 2021 is 112. So do you see that? I'm going to say it again, 177, 150, 112. Okay? Now remember though, 21 we couldn't really do a full campaign because it was just, we were so virtual during the whole time. So now let's transfer that over to dollar amounts, okay? So in 2019, our pledge giving was not over $900,000, okay? And that's pretty constant to prior years. A little bit of a drop prior years, but generally that's a number. 2020, the pledge giving dropped to $770,000, okay? And then our budget for this year is $590,000, okay? So do you see that drop? And it's consistent with the drop of pledge givers, all right? So let's think about differences. Our pledge giving in 2021 dropped by $183,000 versus the pandemic year of 2020. So remember that, it dropped $180,000 because that's going to come up later. Then if you look at 2 years, 2021 versus 2019, the cumulative total, it dropped $330,000, okay? But what I'm going to focus on is the drop year to year. That 330 is amazing, but then we really need to focus on where we are this year versus 2020. So with that being said, sorry, I can't use David's iPad. And just so you know too, the Finance Committee's worked diligently on this over the last year or so. We did go out and get 2 Small Business Administration PPP loans, right? One was forgiven for $130,000 or so. One we applied for $13,000, but that has not yet been forgiven, but it looks like in June, when they get caught up, that will be forgiven. We've received some special one-time gifts. We know they're one-time gifts because we were told so by the person giving. We have cash in the bank. So what we're trying to do is look forward, because a business entity cannot run off PPP loans, special gifts, and cash reserves. We have to run based on operating cash flow. Our expenses on an ongoing basis cannot exceed our revenue, okay? It's like you can't write checks. You can go get credit card debt or a mortgage, right? But you can't sustain yourselves by doing that all the time. You have to live within our operating cash flow. Our expenses cannot exceed our revenue. And there have been years in the past where it did, but it was like the Finance Committee could deal with it. $20,000, $30,000, we can handle that. But I'd like to show this slide. Our deficit in 2021 is $170,000. And remember I told you our revenue dropped by $180,000? That's the culprit. okay? There's a lot of other working parts and movement and things, but I don't want to dwell on that. We are where we are. It is what it is. Your finance committee, led by Phil Bledsoe, has worked tirelessly looking at different opportunities and different ways to address this. When we first started seeing this, it was going to be apparent. But our revenues are short by our expenses by $170,000 in 2021. So there, red flags go off. The finance committee has met with various committees to drop their budgets significantly to get this number down. It was a higher number before, right? But all that's left is to increase revenue through giving or cut more programs. And that's what I want to talk about. David and Mike Keepers and Church Council have this vision of programs, but it's very difficult for us to envision that right now because of this deficit. There's other, and I just want to tell you too, I don't know if you read the press, other churches are in the same situation coming out of 2020. They went out and got PPP loans to survive or whatever, and to varying degrees, right? But this is a clear problem because we just cannot continue to operate this way thinking that we're going to get more PPP money or more special gifts or whatever. We have to work within our operating income. So all that's left is programs. And so I want to make sure I'm clear on this. All that's left is programs. We've cut everything else down. There's some things we can't cut, like our apportionments to the conference and things of that nature. So now our point is we must act, okay? And what I'm asking everybody, whether you're here, and I appreciate so much you're here, I appreciate everybody that's watching online, or even if later. But there's 3 things that have to be done, okay? And I'm really appealing to you because these programs, the family ministries, the children's programs, the music, the things we do in the community, everybody is just so moved by it. And it's a great representation of our church. But I'll be honest with you, it's not going to continue in that same present form if we can't increase our revenue. So my appeal to you is, if you're pledging now, we just really, really, really wish, I said really 3 times, please prayerfully consider increasing your pledge for 2021. If you don't pledge, we would appreciate your considering pledging for 2021 and possibly even increasing the amount, okay? And I know pledging is a very personal thing. If you don't know what your numbers are, the keeper is Faye Knotts at the church office, and she's the only one that knows everybody's giving, and you could just certainly call her at the church office. Do we have a slide with a church office number? No? Okay. I had it written down, but I can't. 622-3244. But that's a second opportunity. And then if you don't give, we would just request that you prayerfully consider giving. I know there's so many organizations in Ocala, believe me, I know, that just beg for sponsorships and commitment on the part of, and I know everybody's spread thin. That's why we didn't really do a big fundraiser last year, because we heard from people, I'm having a tough time with my family, I'm having a tough time with finances, and the church took the approach, we're going to help people. We're not going to be asking for help ourselves. The church will help others through the pandemic. But now, okay, the rubber's met the road, and we just really need to figure out of one of these 3 ways, can people increase their giving or pledge or actually start giving to help us through 21. This church has so many great qualities and is truly blessed. And like I said, there's the 5 pillars of the Methodist church, and service is one of them, and that's what draws me and Rebecca here into this church. It's just incredible. But another important part of the 5 is gifts and stewardship financially. And I'd really appreciate your taking the time to consider that for us. We will also send a letter out this week with all this information sort of summarized. And when you get the letter, I really appreciate your prayerfully considering helping us out through 2021 so we can move on in the future. Thank you.